So in 1960, you have a very important election in which the United States is, for the first time, the American population is deciding the president, and they're actually watching the debates on television. And you have two very different politicians running for the election. You have Republican Richard Nixon, who had a lot of credit, a lot of street cred when it came to being the anti-communist guy. He had way more experience than John F. Kennedy. He was an old school politician. He was vice president under a very popular Dwight D. Eisenhower. And then you have the Democrats turning to a young man, 42 years old, with a beautiful wife, two small kids, senator, congressman, and he's running under this kind of platform called New Freedom. And basically the whole idea was victory, reform at home, reforming the home front, and victory abroad against communism. He also happened to be Catholic, which played a role in the election. There was, some controversy, some people who did not want to support him because of his faith. If you remember, in 1928, that issue came up in the election of Al Smith as well. And you have the first debates ever being held on television, presidential debates, and you get 70 million Americans watching this. And just to give you some context, the most watched programs today is the Super Bowl, and that's a little over 100 million people watching. And what happens during these debates is the American people see two very different candidates. And if you take a look.
Richard Nixon was the favorite to win the Republican presidential nomination in 1960. Just 14 years after he was tapped by a group of small-town businessmen to run for Congress in California, Richard Nixon stood at the top of his party. As he mapped out an ambitious 50-state campaign, he was challenged by his opponent, John F. Kennedy, to a series of televised debates, the first in American history. Even when hospitalized for 2 weeks with a knee injury, Nixon remained confident, anxious for the debates to begin, eager once again to use television to talk directly to the voters.
The Republican candidate, Vice President Richard M. Nixon, and the Democratic candidate, Senator John F. Kennedy.
Handsome!
According to rules set by the candidates themselves, each man...
The Nixon-Kennedy debates would forever change the way Americans chose their presidents. Political rallies and old-fashioned handshaking became much less important than the image on the television screen.
You must understand that Nixon himself had said, I don't want any makeup on for these particular debates. What I tried to explain to Dick was he has a certain characteristics of his skin where it's almost transparent. And it was a very nice thought to say, I don't want any makeup, but that he really needed it in order to have what we would call even an acceptable television picture. And of course, JFK, here he'd been riding in motorcades all over California with the top down. He looked like a bronze warrior when he came into Chicago. He really did. I know what it...
Now, for you people watching at home, not all of us can have the natural beauty that Kennedy and myself have. So while we are bronze warriors, Kennedy kind of looks pasty, as we would say, and that hurts him. Presidential image plays a very important role today, and really 1960 is the beginning of that kind of image playing an increasingly important role in politics.
To see people who are unemployed. I know Senator Kennedy feels as deeply about these problems as I do. But our disagreement is not about the goals for America, but only about the means to reach those goals.
The first debate was costly to Nixon. The radio audience thought he had won, but the largest television audience in history had seen the vice president haggard and drawn, and had been given its first sustained look at the Kennedy style.
And I say we can't afford to have the White House as a training ground for an inexperienced man who is rash and impulsive.
This administration has failed to recognize that in these changing times, with a revolution of rising expectations sweeping the globe, the United States has lost its image as a new, strong, vital, revolutionary society.
I have been to Russia and I've seen it. I've been to the United States and I've seen it.
I have shook hands with Khrushchev, and it felt magical.
And there is no need for a second-rate psychology on the part of any American.
Now, the debates, like I've said previously, Kennedy comes out as the winner for those people who viewed it on television. Nixon comes out. It seems like it's a draw for those who listen to it on the radio. what happens is Kennedy wins the election of 1960. It's a very, very, very close election. And you get the significance of the campaign, these two men running. It is a close race. It's not like Kennedy, kicks the heck out of Nixon. Nixon was a very well-respected politician, especially amongst Republicans. But these debates hurt him. And ultimately, you get appearance versus substance. This is something that we struggle with in American politics today. Huge amount of money is going to be spent. And some of the issues in this election is the missile gap. The Democrats actually criticize the Republicans. You are letting the Russians beat us. They mentioned Sputnik. They mentioned this feeling that we are losing this Cold War. Other issues are the Catholic religion. The results take place. Kennedy wins. Now, what you need to realize about Kennedy, there's a lot of stuff about him, but he is a different type of president. Just, looks-wise, he was an intellectual. He was an idealist. He had a small children. First time in a very long time in the White House you have small children in the White House. And he takes office. And he comes forward with a couple of different basic goals. He talks about less of Eisenhower's brinksmanship and more about flexible response. He wants to increase the defense budget. In fact, under Kennedy, the defense budget increases by over 20%. Flexible response means not just atomic weapons, but also conventional soldiers. Also, the formation of special forces units like the Green Berets. So you have this kind of being a goal of Kennedy. You also have that being one aspect of it, but also these other parts with the Green Berets, increasing of the defense budget. One kind of thing that Kennedy does do or presses forward with is at Rice University in 1962, he gives a speech in which he talks about this idea of racing to the moon. For America to be the first country to get to the moon, and he is going to authorize, with the approval of Congress, of a huge amount of investment to get us there. And this is actually an excerpt of that speech accompanied by some pretty dramatic music.
But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic?
Why do your IDs?
Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon.
We choose to stay after school and study for A-Push because...
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
They're hard.
But that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.
Now, we don't need to waste our time watching this clip of Apollo the first time we are on the moon in 1969 because a lot of conspiracy people think it happened in some, sound stage and we didn't really go. But, your choice. So this idea of a man on the moon. And part of the Cold War is a space race, technology. Sputnik is very well known, but there's other aspects of it. Now, here's the thing about Kennedy that you can very easily criticize. In fact, on the AP exam, they may ask you something. Describe, Kennedy's response to civil rights issues. And in the beginning, he's very, very weak. He doesn't come forward with any agenda about civil rights. He doesn't put his neck out there or put his, reputation on the line. And there's a lot of different reasons for it. One is he doesn't want to divide the nation, or more importantly for him and his political future, the Democratic Party. He knows that if he comes out and comes forward with civil rights as an agenda, as an important platform, he's going to get hammered in the next election. He saw what happened to Truman with the Dixiecrats. He saw that Franklin Roosevelt was timid on that issue. He knew it was not going to be politically popular. And he knew that when he won the election in 1960, he barely won. In fact, it's the closest election since 1888. Only 100,000 plus votes separate the two men. So he doesn't really do much when it comes to the issue of civil rights. He ignores the issue. However, one of the things that you saw in the 1950s is the civil rights movement is picking up a lot of momentum. It had been picking up momentum since World War II. Congress of Racial Equality, A. Philip Randolph, other individuals beginning to pressure the federal government to do something. Organizations since the Progressive era, such as the NAACP, had been pressuring for the nation to do something. And in 1961, you get a series of freedom rides taking place, organized by that civil rights group, CORE, Congress of Racial Equality. And basically what the freedom rides were intended to do was to show how desegregation was not being fulfilled in Southern society. It wasn't just schools, it was other areas as well.
The wheels on the bus go round and round, round and round, round and round. The wheels on the bus go round and round, all through the town.
And what these civil rights activists do is they board buses and they have different routes planned, and as they go through Southern society, they are purposely going to areas that they know that desegregation was not being abided by. And as they are going through on these freedom rides, you get
the wheels on the bus go round and round, round and round, round and round. The wheels on the bus go round and round, all through the town.
Many of the activists, many of them students themselves, belonging to organizations such as the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, they are being attacked. Their buses are being firebombed. The passengers aboard the buses are being dragged from them and beaten up in some cases. And what Kennedy is starting to face is a growing nation's anger. How is this happening? Just as the Little Rock 9 incident back in the 50s prompted Eisenhower to finally step in, he's seen that the violence is escalating. And Kennedy, faced with this growing problem, finally relents and sends federal marshals to protect the Freedom Riders. Sends people in to go and protect the rights of these individuals and to pressure for desegregation. And he goes before the nation on television, once again the importance of television, to announce
We are confronted primarily with a moral issue. It is as old as the scriptures and is as clear as the American Constitution. The heart of the question is whether all Americans are to be afforded equal rights and equal opportunities. Whether we are going to treat our fellow Americans as we want to be treated. If an American, because his skin is dark, cannot eat lunch in a restaurant open to the public, if he cannot send his children to the best public school available, if he cannot vote for the public officials who represent him, if, in short, he cannot enjoy the full and free life which all of us want, then who among us would be content to have the color of his skin changed and stand in his place? Who among us would then be content with the counsels of patience and delay? 100 years of delay have passed since President Lincoln freed the slaves, yet their heirs, their grandsons, are not fully free. They are not yet freed from the bonds of injustice. They are not yet freed from social and economic oppression. And this nation, for all its hopes and all its boasts, will not be fully free until all its citizens are free.
And he goes before the nation and he actually calls civil rights a moral issue. He sends in the federal marshals to protect the Freedom Riders, and there is a growing pressure on Kennedy, on the federal government, to do something. Similarly, at the University of Mississippi, a black Air Force veteran of the Korean War, James Meredith, tries to enroll in the school. And basically, mobs of angry white Southerners prevent him from attending the school. In fact, white mobs violently clash with the federal marshals that are sent in to protect this veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces of the Korean War to attend college. The violence leads to hundreds of individuals being injured. In fact, a couple of people lose their lives during this violence. And James Meredith is actually escorted to class on the campus of the University of Mississippi. Shortly after that,
I'm sitting on the dock of the bay, watching the tide roll away.
you have the famous Greensboro lunch counter sit-ins in 1960. And this was actually before the other events. In 1960, you get a group of African Americans in North Carolina and some white civil rights members as well, sitting at lunch counters in the city of Greensboro, defying what was the practice at the time, where black customers were meant to order and take their food elsewhere. This is the counter, the counter that was originally the kind of start of this sit-ins. It is in the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. Just a simple lunch counter in which so much and so many people took risk in order to just sit at.
I'm sitting on the dock of the bay, watching the tide roll away.
And as news of the lunch counter sit-ins becomes known, more and more people join these protests. Starts off relatively small.
I'm sitting on the dock of the bay, watching the tide roll away.
And they were characterized by using non-violent resistance. One of the things about the civil rights movement is the amount of restraint that members of the movement were capable of showing. Milkshakes being dumped on their head, racial slurs, violence being projected upon them, and yet you maintain this non-violent, non-threatening approach to show the contrast between your goals and those who oppose you. So you have this kind of happening. You have violence literally in the streets throughout southern cities as young African American and young Americans are putting their necks on the line for these basic things such as integration, which was constitutionally required. You get Martin Luther King kind of emerging over and over again throughout these struggles. And he was important in Montgomery, but he's important in many other areas as well. Him and his organization, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, going to Birmingham to challenge segregation in Birmingham. King launches a series of marches, sit-ins, pray-ins, teach-ins, where people are basically there to expose the racism, to expose the segregation. Their goal is to break the law and to fill the jails up with nonviolent protesters. When they're there, using nonviolence, defying segregation, they are met with violence. And people in the United States see these images of African American and white civil rights people being attacked by dogs, being brutally attacked by police with batons, dogs, fire hoses, and all of these images, police using cattle prods, attack dogs on nonviolent protesters, inspire other people to get involved and inspire people in the North to demand that Kennedy do something about this. And you have this going on during the protest in Birmingham. Martin Luther King goes to jail once again. He's going to be going to jail over and over again during this whole thing. He's going to write his very famous Letters from a Birmingham Jail, where he basically outlines his philosophy of nonviolent protest and the call to civil rights. It's a very powerful piece of American, literature. And
You can accept it. You will leave those state troopers glutted with their own barbarity. If you can accept it, you will do something that will transform conditions here in Alabama. So I'm not worried this afternoon, however dark it may be, however difficult it may be.
you can hear in King's voice this idea of accepting it and using nonviolence to force Kennedy to do something. And he does. He goes finally on television, talks about civil rights as a moral issue, and begins the process of submitting civil rights legislation to Congress. Keep in mind, presidents do not make laws, but they're capable of kind of changing the dialogue in the nation, of encouraging Congress to act. Other incidences, just to kind of keep you aware of, there's a variety of things. You're never going to know them all, but some of the highlights or the lowlights, whatever you want to call it. Governor George Wallace of Alabama, once again, another governor, this time in Alabama, vowing to continue segregation by blocking black students from attending the University of Alabama. Kennedy has to force him by taking over the National Guard, just as Eisenhower finally did at Little Rock in Arkansas, to force the governor, who's standing right there, defying the order. And this has got to be the worst cop in the world. He's out of shape. He looks like he's about to fall asleep. He's got like severe health problems, but apparently he's going to be the one who's going to keep people out of the school. This is actually a little quote from the dear governor, George Wallace. In the name of the greatest people that have ever trod this earth, I draw the line in the dust and toss the gauntlet before the feet of tyranny. And I say, segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. That's the governor of Alabama, defying the federal laws that were being put in place. I already showed it to you, the speech that Kennedy gave regarding these issues. He talks about it as a moral issue. And what happens, though, is to keep up the pressure, to keep the attention of the nation on this very important issue. Various civil rights groups had been planning for a very long time. Remember, A. Philip Randolph in 1941 was going to march on Washington, D.C. to protest Franklin Roosevelt's inaction with regard to defense, jobs, and wage discrimination. Martin Luther King goes before the masses of people, over 250,000 people. He's one of many speakers on that day, but of course he becomes the most famously and most eloquent of the group, and he gives his very famous I Have a Dream speech right there at Lincoln Memorial. A lot of symbolism there with Lincoln and the whole, Civil War, 13th Amendment, but there you got Martin Luther King and other civil rights leaders posing for a photo. Tons of people there on that day. Martin Luther King.
It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
And if you have a moment, just Google the full speech, and it's quite powerful in terms of the words and the symbolism and the kind of calling the nation out on its ideals and lack of living up to them. So this kind of moment is symbolic of the civil rights struggle. However, there is continued violence. A head of the NAACP in the state of Mississippi, Medgar Evers, the head of the NAACP in Mississippi, a World War II veteran, is gunned down in his driveway by a sniper for his role in the civil rights movement. In cities such as Birmingham, bombs start going off. People start bombing black churches where a lot of the civil rights movement was was organizing and having a profound impact on. Bombs start going off in these black churches, killing young children. In fact, very famously, these children die in one of the bombings in Birmingham as they attended Sunday school. They are killed as a result of this struggle. In fact, things were so bad in Birmingham that it got the kind of horrific nickname Bombingham, because these bombs and this violence, and basically what we would call terrorism, used to try to strike fear in people so that civil rights would not be pressured for. And of course, this mobilized many individuals, caused them to be more committed to the cause, emboldened them to continue the struggle. In November, the violence that was kind of plaguing the nation hits directly home, has nothing to do with the civil rights movement or the civil rights violence that was taking place. But in November 1963, President John F. Kennedy was in Dallas in an open car convertible, and he was gunned down by a man, Lee Harvey Oswald, who there's all sorts of theories about this, conspiracy theories. The Russians had him killed. There was more than one gunman. The Cubans had him killed because of the whole like Bay of Pigs, thing. There's a bunch of different things. The mob had him killed. Most people, though, say Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone and shot and killed President Kennedy, and it was captured on video. You can watch the very famous Zapruder film that has been dissected a million different times by a million different people. Kennedy's killed. There is his brother, Bobby Kennedy, his widow, Jackie Kennedy, and his young son saluting the casket as it drove by. With the death of Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, the vice president from Texas, takes office. This is actually him doing the oath of office aboard Air Force One with Jackie Kennedy on his side. Kennedy dies with a mixed record when it came to domestic issues. He doesn't have any broad reforms. There's no New Deal, Fair Deal. There's no big reforms that he proposes. Economic growth that did occur came mainly because of the huge military spending. He does get one of the first nuclear test ban treaties. Doesn't do much with regard to civil rights, only until he's kind of pressured into doing things. And he kind of today has grown to become one of these kind of mythic presidents. He has become a martyr. Being killed does wonders for one's reputation. It sounds like a horrible thing to say, but he dies before he could have made more mistakes, or on the opposite end, could have done even greater things in terms of leadership at home. He did do a remarkable job at the Cuban Missile Crisis, but he dies, and Johnson is now president. Now, to tell you a little bit about this guy, Lyndon Johnson's a character.
What's up? What's up?
And that is not Lyndon Johnson's voice, but those are images of Lyndon Johnson. This guy is an old school politician. He was much older than Kennedy. He had been in Washington serving in various different levels of Congress, Senate, Vice President since 1932. He had tons of political experience. He was very good at getting people to join him in various causes, at building coalitions. And he really is going to come forward with this aggressive reform agenda. He wants to kind of take the New Deal where it has gone in terms of reform in America's society and elevate it. So Johnson's going to take the presidency, and he had a bit of a reputation when it came to personal, the way he interacted with those around him. Not that this is going to be on the AP exam. I just find it really fascinating, just the way he was able to kind of get people to follow him or join him in various causes. And in other ways, he had a reputation for being very overpowering and intimidating. He got right in your face. He was very persuasive. He was very good at talking to people. He wasn't really elegant or kind of, that type. So here's just some images that kind of show that Lyndon Johnson approach to the game of politics. All up in it.